Hi, everyone. We bring greetings from Pittsburgh. It's a place we love to call Kidsburg. It's a place where we ask ourselves how our city might be one of the best places on planet Earth to be a kid and to raise a kid. I'm Greg. I'm going to do my best to set the context and then turn to my three amazing colleagues to the left to talk about remake learning. So just like you, and like everyone here at South by, we know that what we're doing to support today's youth is not enough. And just like you, we wrestle every day with data and with forecasts about what we ought to do. And just like you, we ask all the time, how might we? How might we reschedule the typical school day? How might we rebuild learning spaces? How might we change the experience of learning itself? How might we rethink the role of adults in kids' lives? And you know this, educators all across the globe are asking these sorts of questions. I had the good fortune to travel last year in Kyoto, and that photo that you see there, I saw on a train station. And the billboard had an ad for a local school that included a tagline, "A future based on craftsmanship." Isn't that what modern learning demands? Futures in which learners themselves design what comes next. Craftsmanship reimagined as a contemporary approach to storytelling or artistry or invention. Back in Pittsburgh, our responses to these questions are framed by the legacies of two local giants. Does anyone know who this is? Nobel laureate and CMU professor Herbert Simon, who said this: "Learning results from what the student does and thinks, and only what the student does and thinks." And who knows who this is? A few more of you. Fred Rogers. Yes, Fred Rogers was a television personality, a child development specialist, a puppeteer, a great musician. Yet he was also a disruptor, someone who saw what was attractive to kids of his day and tried to make what was attractive good through the modern technology of television. And he taught us to put kids first and to disrupt learning with respect and love for kids' futures. So as we look ahead, that must be our mindset and also our promise. Will we support learners like this young woman here, mindful about the learning sciences and about brain science, mindful about what activates today's youth, mindful about modern learning pedagogies, and mindful about the still very critical role of caring adults and their relationships with kids? It is this very challenge that the Pittsburgh region has embraced on behalf of its young people during the past decade. Today, more than 250 organizations, including schools, museums, libraries, after-school programs, early learning centers, creative industries, institutions of higher education, have banded together under the umbrella of the Remake Learning Network to design next-generation teaching and learning experiences in and out of school, pre-K to higher ed, so that all youth might acquire the knowledge, the skills, and the dispositions to help them invent brilliant futures for themselves and for our region. In every way possible, the thousands of educators and professionals involved in the Remake Learning Network are modern-day Fred Rogers, who are creating not a land of make-believe, but an actual land of joy, wonder, and creativity. On any given day, a young person in Pittsburgh can access a deliberate pathway of learning based on his or her interests and curiosities. A young person inspired while tinkering at the Fab Lab at the Carnegie Science Center might be directed to the labs at the Carnegie Library, where artists and technologists, along with librarians, support her in coding a robot or animating a short film. That in turn may lead her to an organization called Assemble, a community space for arts and technology, where she thrives in hands-on STEAM learning during Girls' Maker Night. Soon thereafter, she may find herself exhibiting her ideas for 3D printing drones at the Maker Fair at the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh. And all along the way, she's been supported by remarkable teachers and educators at school districts like Elizabeth Ford, Avonworth, and South Fayette. In 2017, it's become totally normal for educators all across our region to create remarkable STEM, STEAM, maker, and technology-enhanced learning experiences for young people. It's entirely normal for teachers to be working alongside technologists, designers, and artists to reimagine their own craft. Learning scientists graduating from Carnegie Mellon University and elsewhere are working alongside museum educators, designers, and youth workers to remake experiences in and out of school. And entrepreneurs are testing new products, software, and devices alongside youth, prototyping and identifying what works and what doesn't. And we see the results. We see the results in places like Elizabeth, Pennsylvania, where young people are re-engaged in their learning and their results are showing it. This work to remake learning is a decade in the making, and in the years ahead, Pittsburgh's educators and makers will construct even more authentic and genuine learning pathways, utilizing our region as a campus for learning. And what better place than Pittsburgh to forge futures based on craftsmanship remade for our times? Zeke, let's take a look.
When it's hands-on learning, it's something that you want to do.
How do we make Pittsburgh the very best place in the world for children? We're all about empowerment, but empowerment through technology innovation. We work with local service organizations and local students, parents, families, and adults in such a way that our technologies can be authentically useful in them improving their circumstances.
When I go back to school, I'll be able to apply what I've learned here into my classwork, and when I do that, I'll be more prepared looking for a job after I graduate.
The learning and rehearsal of skills, whether it's arithmetic or literacy, becomes so central. What sometimes gets neglected is how do we help children grow on the inside?
It's really about pivoting the conversation from education to learning and harnessing all of the assets in a community to contribute to that overall learning journey a young person takes.
We need to learn a lot throughout our whole life. We should never stop learning.
So during this hour together, come with us to Pittsburgh, and we invite you to come whenever you'd like to, but certainly during this hour. It's a place just like this one that stands among the frontier of innovative teaching and learning in this nation. From Silicon Valley to the White House, entrepreneurs, policymakers, and educators are turning to Pittsburgh to learn how Mr. Rogers' neighborhood became Tomorrowland. And this upcoming May, for example, you come and visit Pittsburgh and visit any number of 350 events that are designed for families and caregivers to help them understand, in fact, how learning is being remade at the world's largest open house about the future of learning. Because we want every day to be a beautiful day in her neighborhood. And that's why we remake learning. So how is it that this came about? I'm joined here today by three modern-day Fred Rogers to help answer that question. They're all of these things, but for today, we'll call one an educator, one an inventor, and one an explorer. And first, I'd like you to meet Jane Werner, the educator. Jane is the executive director of the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, a place recognized nationally for its work in hands-on and maker learning. Zeke, let's take a look, please.
We are in the Make Shop here at the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh. The Make Shop is a rich and supportive, informal learning space for children and families to come together. You can do everything from sewing, woodworking, electronics, digital media, It really takes hands-on learning to another level.
MakeShop came out of an existing philosophy about providing innovative museum experiences.
Can we use the museum as a laboratory for learning?
So this is our loom. Young kids love patterns and it's a very full body experience. One of our activities that's always very popular is our circuit blocks. This is a dinosaur head. So this is stop motion animation video that somebody was working on.
The Make Shop is actually a collaboration between the University of Pittsburgh Center for Learning in Out-of-School Environments, the Entertainment Technology Center at Carnegie Mellon University, and the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh. And we were all sitting around and talking about what the future was going to look like in education. The maker movement came up, and the more we talked about the maker movement, the more we realized that it was something that we wanted to kind of investigate.
If we think of making as being experiences where learners or participants can make and build things with real tools and real materials, it's about learning to make mistakes and learning from your mistakes, being persistent in the face of challenges, developing confidence and creative confidence.
The maker movement is nothing new. It's just a revisit of something very old, which is the whole concept of learning through doing. But I think it's been reinvigorated with the idea of using real materials and tools, working with others, learning about the way in which the world around you relates to the things that you're learning and the things that you're doing.
We have a very learner-centered approach, and we try to be very explicit on the learning that we hope to see and create experiences that elicit that learning.
You know, a big part of family learning in museums in general is the idea of collaborating and learning from one another. In MakeShop, the learning dynamic is actually, a parent or a caregiver, a child, and then the MakeShop teaching artist or facilitator.
The materials don't always speak for themselves. Museum educators bring those tools to life, bring those materials to life.
All the research is showing that it's the people involved who really get kids excited about the maker culture. They're crucial to the whole experience.
Is this part of the crane or is this practice?
No, I'm just stabilizing.
Okay.
Well, the Make Shop has really made us think differently about what it means to be a museum and the role of museums in people's lives.
We as a group in MakeShop have been able to think really critically about the kinds of things that we want to see learners participating in, the learning practices of making here in our space.
The University of Pittsburgh helps us in understanding what happens in these spaces from a learning perspective that then be applied to the formal education world.
And through that conversation between research and practice, we were able to form a real language around learning, and our teaching artists now use that language to understand what they're designing towards and what they're identifying as evidence of learning.
And I think what's really appealing about maker spaces within institutions is feeling that you are a part of that institution, that you're invested.
It's also about realizing one's own potential. I think what happens in here and happens in lots of places in Pittsburgh should be part of the collective discourse around learning.
One way to show you love someone is by making them something.
Jane, speaking of love, so as we imagine what education might become in 10 years, what is the value you hope we find at the core of learning?
Well, it's kind of interesting. We've talked about this for a while at the museum, and one of the things that you did not see in the video is that at the entrance of Make Shop is Fred Rogers' sweater. And it was actually made by his mother. And it's kind of been one of the things that kind of grounds us, is that, one way to show someone you love them is by making them something. And I started to really think that the value that in the future that I think we're really going towards, and we've been talking about quite a bit, is kindness. And kindness towards not only one another, but kindness to the earth and kindness to ourselves. And if we kind of approach these things around kindness, you could see how the curiosity about the world and creativity and really kind of comes into play. And it's a little bit of going back to Fred Rogers, of really kind of not just looking at education as facts and figures and learning, but maybe even learning about ourselves in a different kind of way. So that's something that we're really exploring in the future, and that's a value that we're going to really kind of delve into in the next couple of years. And we like to think that we can experiment at the museum where maybe you can't do the same kind of thing in a classroom. So if we can actually do the experiments and kind of figure out how it all works, then we'll see how if we can translate it to the formal classroom.
Great. I'm going to turn to introduce Ela and Z. I want to invite you to use Slido because we're going to sit down for a conversation, but we very much hope that you're as much a part of the conversation. And having attended other sessions, you know that at this conference, we're using Slido to great effect. So I encourage you to start uploading your questions on that app. Next, I'd like you to meet Ela Norbosch, our inventor. Ela is a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, and he directs a community robotics lab called Create. Take a look at this brief video about Carnegie Mellon University.
Carnegie Mellon is a world-class research institution. We have really strong departments across the arts, science, and humanities. But at the end of the day, we're a collection of people, and we all live in Pittsburgh. We're rooted here. We bring up our children here. And our ideas and our inspirations for the way the world should be and how we can design the future with technology is sourced from the context and the communities and the people and the experiences we have here.
We're all about empowerment, but empowerment through technology innovation. So we asked the question, how can we reach out and have a lasting, authentic relationship with local service organizations and local students, parents, families, and adults in such a way that our technologies can be authentically useful in them improving their circumstances?
The size of Pittsburgh is crucial to the success of what's going on. We have enough civic institutions, engagement, and stuff like that that helps give it that type of traction and momentum. But then again, it's not so large that it's lost within cacophony. The Entertainment Technology Center is a 2-year professional graduate program that focuses on design and development. So we like to get interdisciplinary students here, and then they're required to make things like video games or theme park installation. And so what's fun about all of those entertainment technologies for us is then how do we apply them in various areas, whether it's educational or learning or health and medical or just civic engagement. So like our focus is really applied research.
Where we are in public education is that we need to create exciting environments for children to have an opportunity to learn different and creative things. We want children to be excited about coming to school, making school the cool place to be. So we want to have technologies that are here that the children do not have at home.
Small Lab is motion capture kind of experience, embodied learning. And it comes with quite a few games already, but they don't necessarily fit the curriculum it was before, or the particular teachers. So it wasn't getting used as much, whereas when our students made things that they wanted and fit into their curriculum, they're using it all the time now. Our students oftentimes, within the very first week, will do a paper version of what they have in mind and put it in front of school students. Sure, we once were 6th graders, but you're not that anymore, so you've got to get in front of the students. And it's constant, iterating all the time.
The students feel as if it's more about them and that this is being tailored to them. They just value what goes on in this room a little bit more.
The reason it's working is the teachers are in it. It's not just having technology, the teachers are really getting more engaged in that mind because it allows them to, creating the space that enables the teachers to do their jobs better.
People learn from each other. We learn through talking and gestures, through text and images, and increasingly these learning interactions are mediated through technology and digital media. The Create Lab is a really interesting model for how a university with a really strong technical background manages to engage the community.
One of the beautiful things about universities is that they're amazing places for innovation. And yet, when you look at how they relate to the communities right around them, often they parachute in, do a test, and leave, and they leave no lasting positive social impact. So the Create Lab was born out of a desire to change the way a university relates to its surrounding community. How do we make Pittsburgh the very best place it can be for children? To do that, you need to empower and amplify the voice of children themselves.
So we're hopeful that these videos are giving you a rich sense of the complex network of organizations supporting educators and adults in kids' lives, and then the kids themselves. Ela, if I may, I want to turn to you with the same question that I asked of Jane. As you look forward a decade, what is the value you would hope to see at the core of learning?
Well, I would build upon that very phrase you just used, the complex network. It's important to think about education as a system, as a network. And if we're going to have a healthy network, if we're going to be able to really help everybody in society, the value that I place firmly as a bedrock is authenticity. We need a system that's authentic to the true needs, the desires, the hopes, the aspirations of every stakeholder. And if we can do that, I think we get 3 consequences that are pretty exciting. One of them is alignment. If we're truly authentic, then we forge common ground between parents and educators and learners. something that is sorely missing in the current system of education generally. The second consequence we get that I think is powerful is if we're authentic to the needs people have broadly and comprehensively, then we have engagement with everybody because everybody feels that they matter and that their case matters. And then you get inclusiveness. And inclusiveness is what you need if we want equity in education. And the third one I want to say is just, there's a parallel session right now called Coding for Justice. And I'm here, so I can't be there. But it's interesting, right? They're talking about the idea that it's not enough to code. You have to code to make the world a more just place. By that same token, if we are authentic, we also empower. And when we empower every stakeholder to actively try and make the world a better place, then we have a chance of achieving the kind of justice that we talk about and hope for.
And part of empowering is giving young people themselves true agency, true authority, true influence. And I'd like you to meet Zainab Arisa, Z. Z, apart from being a student at the Creative High School in Pittsburgh, she's co-producer for a local television show about teens making a TV show. Take a look.
3, 2, 1.
Hi, I'm Z.
I'm Olivia.
And I'm Johnny. And we're a part of the Real Teens here at the Fred Rogers statue.
Mr. Rogers used the technology of his time, television, to connect with kids.
And now, a new movement is using this technology to inspire a whole new generation of learners.
And that's the focus of our whole show.
Well, I came to visit you for your Remake Learning event today.
What's Remake Learning?
And why is it taking over the city?
And changing the way kids like us learn.
I am here to see what's happening in this amazing school.
From what's happening at local schools?
At local companies.
With other teens like us making videos.
Whether it's the mayor's office or the top research universities, libraries, museums, nonprofits, philanthropists and foundations all coming together to remake learning for the 21st century.
Find out what Remake Learning is.
And why 30,000 people showed up from all over to check out Remake Learning Days.
The Real Teens Pittsburgh starts right now.
So what's all the Real Teens?
I don't think anyone knows what the show is.
It's a little unorganized.
Take a look through my lens. I'll show you a few things.
It's a show about teenagers in the city of Pittsburgh with the opportunity to
be creative and make your own stories and do your thing.
We're all really cohesive and we understand what we need to do and we get it done.
So Z, if I may ask you that same question that we asked of Jane and Ela, what would you want to see at the core of learning as we look ahead?
At the core of learning as we look ahead through the next 10 years, I hope there's inclusion, diversity, and self-discovery. I feel that oftentimes to have a project or create an end goal, you need to include as many people with as many different opinions as possible. I would like to see diversity because I feel that there is no set person that belongs to a set field, and many people can do different things, and having diversity within all of these groups can also create a place where our goals are shared. And then lastly, I hope for self-discovery because as you saw on the screen, I ended up working on a TV show and getting into the film field, whereas before maybe a year ago, I would think of myself solely as a writer. So without being able to work at the job I do and being around cameras and people who are from all different walks of life, I would have never found myself working for a TV show that airs on Fox 53. So check it out.
So we're going to turn to these three for a conversation. If you have questions about the network itself, one of the great resources made available by the Sprout Fund is something called the Remake Learning Playbook, which if you were to Google Remake Learning Playbook, you would find plays that you would make maybe on a basketball court, but thinking about a learning ecosystem and what are the plays that you could deploy in your community to support a learning ecosystem that takes advantage of the myriad of assets and organizations that we can bring to bear to totally change learning experiences for learners all across our cities. And again, I want to invite you to participate in the conversation via Slido or Twitter, although I would prefer Slido since this is a great resource that we have available to us. So, Ela, Z brought up issues of equity and inclusion, and in fact, all of you did in different ways. So, particularly as you look at the STEM field, we talk a lot about STEM, and around this country, people talk about STEM, and we've talked about STEM for decades, and yet we have remarkable gaps in gender, in racial inclusion in STEM. So, why are things going to be different? How do we think about equity given the very real challenges we have?
This is a great question. You know, it's a very depressing fact that within STEM fields, the wage gap between gender and between race is just as bad, just as inequitable as outside STEM fields. And it points out that it isn't the topic, the content of education that's going to solve our problems. It's something much bigger than that. And my heart sinks when I see cases where somebody's improved a school somewhere, like on the West Coast, with a whole lot of venture funding, in a way that's utterly unsustainable for the rest of the country, by pouring literally tens of millions of dollars into a single school. And fundamentally, to solve those problems, I look at something that we do in Pittsburgh and have started to do right, which is schools of education have been left in the dust. We simply don't attend enough to the fact that schools of education, the places where the teachers become a pre-service educator, get their initial training, learn about implicit bias, and begin a trajectory that can take them down the pathway of solving the challenges of inequity that we have in society. Those very places aren't where the innovation hits home. Often the innovation happens directly from an innovation hub, like a for-profit company directly into a school system. So to me, an absolutely critical thing we can do, and something I'm really proud that the Create Lab does, is to forge meaningful relationships with schools of education so that the entire system of education is one in which innovation and integrity are introduced at the school of ed level. And that means every teacher for that school district has the chance to benefit from that, pre-service and in-service. If we can approach this that way, and believe me, the schools of ed would like nothing more than to be at the forefront of innovation and learning. They'd like to remake learning, they're just not often in the room. And so I think that is the one most important ingredient I think is missing that every city should be doing what Pittsburgh does on, which is really opening the door to the schools of ed, having them in the room, fundamentally innovating and deploying and refining and being part of the cycle of innovation that enables the teachers, regardless of the socioeconomic status of the schools they go to be able to benefit from that proper education.
So can you explain a little bit more about this? Because the network that you've created, it's unusual for institutions of higher education to work together. So the Create Lab at Carnegie Mellon University has forged partnership with schools of education at places like West Liberty University, Carlow University, West Virginia University. These are regional schools, some of them of international stature, some of them small local schools that are significant feeders for the educators who are then in our public school districts. And can you talk about the work that you do with that partnership and how you've expanded it to places like Utah?
So the partnership is interesting because what you recognize is that when a school of education is designing professional development programming for their local teachers, it's going to be culturally relevant to that place. It's even going to be socioeconomically relevant to that place. And so we don't, as a Create Lab, provide any shrink-wrap curriculum to any of them. Instead, we provide technology tools and workshopping with the professional development designers in the schools of ed. And then each school of ed actually custom designs in a completely bespoke way the kind of professional development deployment for pre-service and in-service teachers appropriate for their particular place, for the standards that they have in their state, for the licensing requirements of their state. So what you're doing is really not creating homogeneity at all. You're creating biodiversity. You're creating a kind of diversity that allows each place to be able to prosper and have ownership and be authentic that way. That worked so well in West Virginia and in Pennsylvania that we got additional funding from a national foundation to do this in the city of Atlanta and in the state of Utah. So in fact, every school of education in Utah is now working with us, creating bespoke professional development for each location in Utah, as well as a very large urban center, much bigger than Pittsburgh, in Atlanta. And the dream here is really, you're not providing something. You're not in a power relationship where we're giving and they're taking. You're empowering every school of ed to create and own the practices that are most appropriate in their place. In turn, what we get back is the feedback that allows us to make the next set of innovations next year that are most relevant to the challenges they face. And so our ears are to the ground, trying to innovate in a way that we actually make something useful rather than making a hammer and then trying to find a nail somewhere.
Yeah. Z, you talked about the diversity of experiences and mindsets that you've encountered on the Real Teens production, for example. And what Ela is describing is helping pre-service teachers who are going to be populating our schools and teaching students just like you to think wholly differently about their practice. Why are those multiple perspectives so important to you, as the way you articulated moments ago?
I believe that multiple perspectives are important to me because you're able to get a wide range of opinions. At the Real Teens, I work with kids who live like hours away from me, and then there's kids like me who live in the city about like 20 minutes away from work. So my perspectives are different from theirs. Also, I go to a performing arts high school and some people go to a more traditional high school. So what I'm thinking about, like when I think of remake learning, I may be thinking about something totally different from someone who is playing football or hockey, whereas I'm more so writing on my laptop, making some poems. But there are a lot of different ways that you can gauge and be able to take from all of these opportunities and perspectives, so you can create an end goal that you're all proud of.
And do you think it's making your stories better?
I definitely believe it's making our stories better. At first, when I first started working there, I thought that like my ideas were like supreme and like superb, and then you get to work with different people and you hear what they're thinking and you're like, whoa, this is also a really good idea. And something else I've learned while working there is about compromise, and you have to be willing to take from one idea and take from another idea, because maybe your idea isn't always the best idea.
Such real-world application of the things that we talk about when people use phrases like 21st century learning, Jane. STEAM is an acronym that we've heard a lot during the course of this conference so far. I'm thrilled about that, that left and right brain connection of the arts and STEM. Can you talk a little bit about the critical importance of the humanities? You're such a great advocate as an arts leader, as a cultural leader, and as a culturally based organization, you've wrestled with issues of technology and science. So speak to this.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it goes back to this. I never quite understood why education always ended up in these silos, because life isn't actually like that. It kind of crosses over. And I think that sometimes we, especially when we look at STEM, maybe we've actually sacrificed the humanities a little bit. And how do you actually make good decisions? If you don't know the great stories of literature or history or philosophy, you might have all the knowledge that you have gleaned from STEM, but I think actually making sure that the arts are included is really important, because it's a creative aspect, and I know creativity is actually not just in the realm of artists, because I actually think that artists and scientists are actually questioning their model of the world just the way young children are. I think that actually teaching to the whole child, really looking at the social emotional aspect of kids, it's really important. I actually really liked what you said too. We don't do curriculum either, because we find that if you go into schools and you say, how can I help? And then listen, you can learn a lot from each other. And I think that's kind of the beauty of remake learning too, because we just keep having conversations back and forth. So,
in your lab, at the cutting edge of wizardry, Ela, how are your scientists and innovators and inventors wrestling with the humanities?
We wrestle with it head on, and part of that is because we live in a complicated age now, where innovation, you used to get a computer science degree, you didn't take a single class in ethics or morality, because it was somewhat abstract and theoretical. It was kind of like getting a theoretical mathematics degree. You know, how black holes work doesn't actually cause ethical ramifications to society today. Not very much anyway. And innovation has caught up with the world. It has become so strong, so powerful of a weapon, like an atomic scientist who thought nothing had social ramifications until suddenly it did, because we had a nuclear bomb. But by that same token, innovation itself has this massive downstream consequence and implication on culture now. We can invent something new, and the new thing we invent can change society. I can create digital marketing products that sadly change the way people choose products to buy, that change the way people vote in an election, and change the outcome of the election using machine learning and AI. So we have to look at technology invention no longer as this neutral thing that, oh, it's neutral. It can be good or bad. It depends on how you apply it. No, that's nonsense. When you invent, you're changing society because our inventions have so much power against society. So what we do, to get back to your question, is we can't invent in a vacuum anymore. It just doesn't make sense anymore because inventing changes the world. So first of all, inside the lab, we listen. We try to invert the power relationship. You know, to kind of be really blunt about it, we have this hegemonic power structure in society today. The people with capital and the people with power are on top. And education is at the bottom of that power relationship in a very bad way, in that the funding drives the innovation gets a piece of technology made, and then somebody somewhere sticks it in a school to write a paper and say, look, it works better. And then they leave, and the schools know better. It's the parachute metaphor that I used earlier. So that power hegemonic structure has to get inverted. And the way we do that is we start by saying that the maximal value is at the end of this whole chain. It's the child and the parent and the educator. They are the ones we have to honor above all else. And the education can only exist in service of them. And that means that you have to do participatory design. So everything we design in the lab is done in a participatory manner with the educator in the room and with the child in the room. And only by doing this over the course of 6 or 7 years do we make a product. So you can't do this flash in the pan. You can't do this in a year. It takes years to do this right. But it means being really slow and patient. And of course, that is a big problem for funding because funders don't fund you. You know, NSF grants don't go 7 years.
Bad funders.
So that becomes hard. And the last thing I'll say about that is just that at the school level, we are also trying something new around this because I think every inventor has to learn ethics and humanities. So actually, starting this coming fall, we have a new freshman seminar at Carnegie Mellon for freshmen in computer science and humanities, not just humanities. It's a class.
The two of us were talking about how the humanities, and
Yeah.
you know, here I am in a children's museum, and I was concerned about the humanities and young children, and you said, oh, Carnegie Mellon is really interested in this now too, and I thought, isn't that interesting? At both ends of the spectrum, we're starting to really focus in on the humanities.
Let me, because in all candor, none of this matters unless it matters to the learner. And I'm reminded of, again, of Herb Simon. It's what the learner wants and needs, and only about what the learner wants and needs. So, Z, as you think about the wrestling of content and thinking about the future, what are the sort of physical characteristics of the places you would want to learn? What are the experiences that you'd want? What is the support that you want from adults? How would you design this?
The support, or rather the space that I would want to see while learning, is a space that has no walls or no boundaries and is off the textbook. Personally, there's a course offered at my school, and it's indie film. And my friends have been telling me that they're writing about like the angles and the lighting and the shots. And here I am thinking, well, wait, I actually do this like after school, 4:30 every day. Well, not every day, but I'm always thinking about it. And so I don't believe I would be as interested in film as if I were actually doing it. And how we learn at Stilltown is not just like by the books, it's really hands-on. It's like pick up the camera, kind of explore it, and they show you how to do it. So it's totally different. And learning doesn't just come from a classroom. Learning can come from visiting the next town over, talking to your neighbors, being willing to explore and be open-minded about the different topics and different opinions that different people have.
Jane, Z just used the word hands-on. We talk a lot about hands-on, project-based learning, maker learning. Is this what the current times demand? Is this a flash in the pan? Or the plan, flash in the pan. How do we make sure this is authentic, that it has meaningful staying power for learners of all ages?
Yeah, it's interesting because, I've worked in the hands-on museum field for, I don't even want to tell you how long. And I think what's interesting is at the museum, we actually now have a department of learning and research. So we're trying to really kind of get at what's happening in hands-on learning. And in the maker space, we actually have principles of practice. And actually, our director of research and learning is here, and I brought her cards along. But they're kind of 21st century things that 21st century practices. So the learning practice that we talk about are in the maker space is inquire, tinker, seek and share resources, hack and repurpose, express intention, develop fluency, simplify to complexify. Now, none of those have anything to do with anything that you would say, okay, I can do a test on this. But they're kind of learning practices that everybody is going to need in the future. So you take this hands-on experience and you can actually translate it into learning principles of practice around learning. And that's what we've really become interested in. How do you actually take all of this hands-on learning and make it even more meaningful?
So you've worked closely and gotten support from the Institute of Museum and Library Services for the National Science Foundation. Can you talk a bit about this research and the building of evidence and what it means not only for the Children's Museum, but you're part of a network, the Remake Learning Network. We have almost 140 maker spaces in the Pittsburgh region alone, in local schools, museums, and libraries. You support all sorts of professional development programs for educators from early learning centers, K-12 schools. How is this evidence base supporting you and changing the practice and allowing you to iterate?
Well, it's interesting because it has been this amazing experience where Lisa Brahms and Peter Wardrop, Dr. Peter Wardrop and Lisa, have really looked at what makes a great makerspace. And it's interesting. It comes down to purpose. Why would you put a makerspace in your school or in your environment? You have to know that. And it's so funny that a lot of people don't really think about it. It's like, oh, we just have to do a makerspace. So you have to have purpose. You have to have people. People are kind of crucial to it all. And the last thing, parts and pieces. And that seems to always be kind of the first things that drive it. So I think what we're really interested in is how do you actually translate all of these kind of principles of practice using those three key ingredients to the learner? And how does it become a rich experience? And I think that what we're finding with all the research that we've done, with all of the research across the US have been doing, we really are kind of getting it more and more refined so that teachers can understand it and really figure out how it applies to their classroom. And that is when that's when the magic starts to happen. Doing a makerspace in a museum is fairly easy to do if you really think about it. Doing it in the classroom where it has real meaning, I think is really crucial, and giving real life experiences, just like Z was talking about. I think the learning becomes very rich.
I'd like you all to talk about the relationships, right? Because for all that we're learning about learning itself, there is something timeless and classic that people like Fred Rogers and many others have taught us about relationships. And can you talk about the network itself and how bumping up against other people in all different places in all different ways is enriching your leadership, your experiences as learners, and why that's important, and why cities across this country need to invest in learning ecosystems so that people like the four of us and many others are bumping up against each other?
I just wanted to set the stage on that by just explaining, I started the Create Lab 20 years ago, long time ago. There was no Remake Learning Network. And the best we could do was sit in a fairly isolated way and work with one or two schools near Carnegie Mellon. And for a solid 5 to 10 years, that's all we had. We were doing research, getting NSF money, getting some simple results and publishing them. And what changed the game was actually a ritual created by Greg Bear, a ritual of interconnection where we come together regularly, where educators, innovators, school districts, principals, everybody across the hierarchy, even foundations in Pittsburgh, all start meeting regularly and having ambitious questions, such as, how could Pittsburgh be the very best? And what would it take for us to take steps toward making Pittsburgh the very best place it could be for children? Those ritual meetings, nothing can replace them. There's nothing like a face-to-face meeting that's repetitive with people who are honoring each other and starting to listen to each other's perspectives. The longest standing relationships I have to people like Michelle Figler, who became the executive director of the Pittsburgh Association for the Education of Young Children, and then went on to the state level. But those relationships only happened because I ran into them in repeated ritualized meetings that led to established trust, common ground, common language, and common goals. And that's what led us to a place where we could start working together so thickly. Without that, I'd never be in the same room as Jane, because I'm a university professor and Jane's executive director of a museum. And you don't really run into each other at all. So you've created a set of pathways that intersect. And those intersections are memorialized now in a way where, as new people come into this network, they see that intersection, they become part of it, and they become invigorated by it. And that's become fossilized into Pittsburgh in a way that I think other cities need as well.
Well, and Z, you've seen it as a journalist and a storyteller in a way. So what did you see about it that made you excited about future learners?
Personally, like as a high school student, one of the most important things to me that have been on my mind recently is being able to make connections and being able to try new things. And to do that, you have to have an eagerness and willingness to not be afraid to do things that you thought you'd never do, and getting your feet wet in different movements. So without Steeltown having come to my high school one day and present a movie, I might never have joined Steeltown, and then I might never have done a segment on Remake Learning, and then I probably wouldn't even be here. So it's really about being willing to explore and have like a background and like a backdrop to fall upon, and being like able to see that everyone comes from different places, but you all have a shared goal in mind.
And I'll just say very tactically, because I sit in the fortunate and privileged place of a funder, right? We work with other grant makers, corporations like Chevron, PNC Bank, foundations like the Benedum Foundation, so many others. And we've collectively been able to pool many millions of dollars to support this network over the past decade. And what that translates into are dollars that allow Jane, for example, to experiment with ELA on something that they've been imagining for learning experiences, to support people who are able to help organize conferences and events and the sort of ritualized meetups that you described. Delegations of folks that can go off to the Deeper Learning Conference in San Diego or the MIT Sandbox Summit in Boston. All sorts of opportunities to support risk-taking, disturbing of information, and the relationship building. Slido isn't a great way to create a relationship, but I hope you're posting questions. I also think there's a microphone in the middle of the aisle if someone wants to step up. I don't know if there are any questions. Oh, here we go.
I should put a word in. I think we should put in a word in about Pittsburgh itself. It's the right scale for this to really work well, and I think there's an authenticity to Pittsburgh that actually people know how to work, and we actually work at this, which I think is important to say.
There are a number of questions. I think you can all see them on the screen too, maybe. The latest question is, what would you show Herbert Simon as evidence that Remake Learning has had a positive impact? Right now, a year or two from now, I hope to be able to be back maybe with some of you and talk about network-wide, because there's current funding from the National Science Foundation and others to support network-wide analysis. But we can give you really powerful, discrete examples. I mentioned the Elizabeth Ford School District earlier. The Assistant Superintendent, Todd Karuskin, is seated right up front here. This is a school district that, quite frankly, and I've said this before, you wouldn't expect to have embraced the future of learning. They've introduced new learning spaces, new pedagogical practices, supported new professional development, forged new relationships with organizations like those represented here on this stage. they've seen the types of results where dropout rates have gone from about 28 kids a year to 0 or 1. They've seen math scores increase 4 and 5%, reading scores increase 3 and 4%. Registration in charter schools has dropped. Families and kids want to be back in the public school district. Registration for summer learning is up 500%. These are the types of concrete data points that we can tell you today, and clearly something's happening. The good news is that there's research that the University of Pittsburgh and others are doing about how do we assess the other types of learning that we know are happening in a school building like that. And the great thing is we could give you lots of other examples from libraries and museums and other schools. 3 of you have liked a question about technology, that is not inherently innovative, right? And we have a colleague who often says, look, this thing is nothing more than like fire, the printing press, or a pencil. So how do we make sure that these types of devices and many others are deployed appropriately, mindful of where the learner is, and is merely a tool toward a broader learning experience?
You go for that one.
Really, I'll be brief because I want to get to your questions too. But the problem with technology is the way technology companies provide it to us, we are consumers of technology. And a consumer of technology is not fluent with the technology. They're just literate. We know how to program it and use it and download the latest game and play it and be Zelda. That's not being productive with technology in a creation-based manner. So what do we have to do? We have to get children and learners to use technology as nothing more than a communication tool. So the technology is enabling them to communicate. This is exactly what Z does through movie making. My theory of action for that is 3 steps, and I'll just say them really simply. Inquiry. Teach children to use technology to ask important questions about the real world. That's authenticity for you. Narrative. Make sure learners can actually create their own narratives with technology. So they're not downloading somebody else's narrative. They're making their own. And then advocacy. If you really want to hit a home run, technology has to enable them to be an advocate for social change so that they're taking everything that they just inquired about and all the narration they created, and now they're using it to a real social purpose. And that makes authenticity.
Yeah. There are a couple other questions about the network itself. I just want to draw your attention again to the Remake Learning Playbook. It's something that we've seen communities like Vancouver, British Columbia, Atlanta, Georgia, Charlottesville, Virginia, take that playbook and work with local school systems, community foundations, local professional development providers, and others. Think about how would we develop a local ecosystem. And I know many of our colleagues in Pittsburgh oftentimes receive phone calls and are more than happy to work with. We want good things for kids all across this country. Of course, we're focused in Pittsburgh. There's also a question about the absence of universal pre-K and Pennsylvania's lack of required kindergarten. We do not have the most progressive state capital. And in part, that's a problem. But we also, the reason that we have a Remake Learning Network we do is because over the past 10 to 20 years, the investments in a regional high-quality system of early learning, a high-quality system of out-of-school time, this sort of systems-building effort has been so critical.
Yeah.
Jane.
And I would say that Pittsburgh Public School does a great job of getting a lot of kids into pre-K. The vast majority of kids are into pre-K. They have a really kind of robust program. We actually have 2 Head Start programs in the Pittsburgh Public School within our building. So I'm a big admirer of the early childhood program in the Pittsburgh Public School.
And they've used all of their community block grant money to support those pre-K classrooms.
Which, it's phenomenal, actually.
So part of this regional approach is to say we've got to do it ourselves. And we've got to reach across the traditional boundaries of school districts, of silos of science and art across state jurisdictions, because we sit there at the northern tip of Appalachia, which includes West Virginia and Western Maryland, Eastern Ohio. So we've had to think very differently about those boundaries. There was another question about, well, what comes next for Remake Learning? Jane, Z, Ela, what would you want to see come next for Remake Learning?
Personally, I'd love to see Remake Learning spread further than just well, I know it's forever and spread all across, but I'd love to see it hit different countries and be a global mindset. And I think also something that Remake Learning could benefit from is having a panel of students maybe, or a team of students who kind of work with learners, innovators, educators to see what's working and what can be done and what can be created and to benefit everyone.
Briefly, Ela, Jane?
No, you go.
I think we have to learn how to serve all the children, and we're making advances toward that in Pittsburgh, but I think rural America is so dramatically different from urban America that I think my dream would be that Remake Learning hits all of Appalachia next, and all of Appalachia becomes Remake Learning.
Jane, in 20 seconds.
Oh, I absolutely agree. Ella and I have been doing a lot around West Virginia, and West Virginia, yes, we need to reach more kids. We need to reach all kids. We need to make sure that this is just a rich and deep experience for everyone.
Well, I can tell you the Remake Learning Network has redefined itself multiple times over the course of a decade, and colleagues are involving young people and scientists and artists and educators in all sorts of mission, vision, values conversations right now. How do we pivot as we look to the future to support this network of thousands of educators and practitioners? And also, I'm happy to tell you that Remake Learning Days, which is scheduled for late May, already includes 350 events. It's going to go national in the fall of 2018. So ideally, Remake Learning Days will be coming to your community too. And with that, I want to please join me in thanking Jane, Ela, and Z.